Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be, and welcome to today's webinar on our new Biodiversity Forecast Updates 2022 to 2024. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We have a great lineup of speakers today who will be presenting to you on various topics from our forecast visitor arrivals, macroeconomic situation, and as well as sentiment of travel. So first, let me introduce myself. My name is Paul Brancan. I am the Chief of Staff at the Pacific Asia Travel Association, and I will be your host for today. I do have a couple notes, just a quick reminder of Zoom for those of you who forgot how to use it. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a toolbar with a chat function and a Q&A function. Please submit any questions to the speakers or panelists using the Q&A function. Please do not use the chat function. It's a bit much to have to go back between the chat and the Q&A, but feel free to introduce yourself and say hello, where you're from. If you have any thoughts on whatever is being presented today, feel free to drop them in the chats. So without further ado, we're going to get to our first presentation. So with us today from the International Tour, the School of Hotel and Tourism Management at Hong Kong Polytechnic University. He is the Associate Dean and Mr. and Mrs. Chan Chak Fu Professor in International Tourism. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Haiyan Song. Professor Song?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Let me share the screen first before I start presentation. So you can see the screen now. Right. Okay. So today we are going to present the latest PATA visitor forecast for 2020 and 2024. And this is another update of a series of tourism forecast exercise. The objective of this forecast is that to take future uncertainties of pandemic into consideration, we developed the three scenarios, i.e. the mild, medium, and the severe scenarios. The scenario forecast of quarterly and annual visitor arrivals to 39 Asia-Pacific destinations are generated based on these three different scenarios. The report presents the recovery trend and also market share of the main source regions of Asia-Pacific over the forecasting period between 2020 and 2024. Remember, last year's forecast was from 2021 to 2023. So we add one more year in this forecasting round. And every source market, we forecasted 30 to 40 source markets in terms of arrivals, and also in some cases, tourist expenditure. These 39 destinations within Asia Pacific include, the destinations in Northeast Asia, there were 7, and Southeast Asia, there were 9, and the Pacific 13, South Asia 5, and West Asia 1, which is Turkey, and Americas, which has 4 destinations covered in this forecast report. In terms of the forecasting process, basically there are 3 steps or stages in this round of forecasts. The first stage is what we call quantitative modeling and forecast. We have to using econometric or time series models to model the historic trend of tourist arrivals in different destinations from different source markets. But during the pandemic period, we know the econometric and time series models are not very useful because the underlying influencing factors do not play the role as used to be in this period. Mostly the arrivals was affected by policies and restrictions, and also number of COVID cases in different destinations and also different source market. So we have to make necessary adjustment based on the different COVID situations in different destinations and source market. So in the second stage, we have done automatic adjustment, i.e. the system automatically adjusts the statistical forecast that was produced in the first stage. Basically, we use the data from 2020 quarter 1 to 2021 quarter 2 because this data was available to us. So we can use the actual data of these 2 quarters to adjust the scenario forecast, because the baseline forecast generated by the statistical model that we use different from the actual data. So we're using the actual data to adjust the scenario forecast, and then we extrapolate the trend into the future. But after this second stage of automatic adjustment for some destinations or some source market to a certain destinations, there's still quite a big discrepancy or fluctuation. So we need to make additional adjustment, which is expert adjustment. So we utilize expert views to make further adjustment based on the 3 scenarios that we developed. So these actually are the 3 stages of forecasting exercise for this round. In terms of the scenario development, basically we have to take into different informations into consideration when we develop those scenarios. The first factor that will influence our forecast, actually influence the actual tourist arrivals, in fact, is the COVID-19 vaccination coverage. As we know, over the last year, the COVID-19 coverage has increased significantly within Asia Pacific. And also we considered different border control policies across destinations and also across the source market, because not only the control policies of the destinations would affect tourism demand in this particular destination, but also the source markets policy also will play a role in terms of determining the number of visitors from those source market to the destinations. And we already knew that a few destinations has already adopted the coexistence policy, i.e. to live with the virus. And those source market or destinations basically partially open their borders to international tourism or international travel. And also some destinations adopted the negative PCR test result on arrival. Some destinations require the visitors fully vaccinated on arrival. They have to show the evidence. And also if they don't require fully vaccination, very most likely they will require you to be quarantined for a certain period of time. So those are the informations that has been considered in the forecast. And also based on the changes of COVID-19 situation, and also particularly global spread of a new variant, Omicron, that also play a role in our forecast. But because our forecast was carried out in November, October, the Omicron was just started. So although we considered those information in the forecast, but the influence on our forecast may be a little bit severe, but not too much. Later on, you will see the result. And also we consider some previous research in terms of forecasting tourism demand during the pandemic period or crisis period. And those are the studies we considered. And we also considered some of the forecasts generated by international organizations such as Oxford Economics and the Euromonitor International and the UNWTO. They actually basically generate their forecasts, consider a host of informations which may influence the international travel. Now I'm going to present some of the high-level regional update in terms of tourist arrivals over the next 3 years. Remember, our forecasts start from 2022. As you can see, for the sub-region Americas and Northeast Asia, the solid colored line are our recent forecast, the latest forecast. But we also presented the last round of update or forecast, which we did in the last year. In the last year, we only forecast tourist arrivals up to 2023. As you can see, there are some adjustment in terms of our last year's forecast, but the adjustment is not that significant for the sub-region of Americas. And the blue line is the medium scenario forecast that were produced in the last round. As you can see, it's almost the same as the medium scenario that we produce in this round, although there's some adjustment. For the Northeast Asia, basically the new forecast actually adjust down of our last forecast. As you can see, the dotted blue line was the medium scenario of tourist arrivals in the Northeast Asia. And now the green line represents the new forecast in the medium scenario up to 2024. So there were downward adjustment. But even up to 2024, the tourist arrivals, according to the medium scenario, will not return to the pre-COVID-19 level, which is 2019. But if it is the mild scenario, it will recover, it will a little bit over the pre-COVID-19 number. So there's some hope. In terms of South Asia, they're not, we actually adjust a little bit up, just very little, not too much, as compared with last year. For this sub-region, as you can see, if you look at the medium scenario up to 2024, this region will not return to the pre-COVID-19 level. So it's take much longer than we initially expected to return to normal. For the Southeast Asia, we actually adjusted down of our new forecast in terms of arrivals, and the previous round of forecast was a little bit higher, but based on what we've seen in 2021 in terms of tourist arrivals, we're using the actual information just down of future tourist arrivals in this sub-region. And in terms of West Asia, actually, you can see our new forecast shows there's a very fast and quick recovery compared with last year's forecast. And that is because in 2021, there's already a significant recovery of tourist arrivals in Turkey. And then you can see, according to the medium scenario, so there's a continuous increase over the last 3 years. But still, it will not return to the pre-COVID-19 level in 2024. Still short of the original arrivals, 45 million in 2019. For the Pacific region, we adjusted up a little bit, but not too much, based on the actual figure we received in 2021. Now I'm going to present a few countries' tourist arrivals. These are the major tourist destinations within Asia Pacific. First is China. As you can see, we adjust down the tourist arrivals over the next 3 years as compared with our original forecast. And this is because the very strict COVID-19 policy that has been adopted in China. As you can see, all 3 scenarios has been adjusted down. Even the mild scenarios was adjusted lower than the previous mild forecast. The diagram on the right actually shows the tourist arrivals from a major source market. As you can see, the dotted curve were our forecast generated last year, and the solid lines were the arrival from different source market for this year. And you can see that the numbers were adjusted downward because the stringent COVID-19 policy in China, and that's just understandable. In terms of Hong Kong SAR, so the one on the left, the diagram on the left shows that more or less we adjusted it down a little bit because Hong Kong now is also adopting a zero COVID strategy. Actually, it's quite stringent. In fact, many of the airlines to Hong Kong, flight to Hong Kong has been canceled recently due to the surge of Omicron. So we adjusted down for 2022, and then started 2022, we can see some relative faster recovery. In terms of the source market on the right-hand side, as you can see, to present a similar picture for Hong Kong. Thailand is another major destination within Asia Pacific, and we adjusted down a little bit in terms of tourist arrivals over the next 3 years compared with last year's forecast. And this is the same for the source market. In general, the arrivals was not as many as we forecast in last year. But in 2014, it's very likely the recovery were to the previous COVID-19, according to the mild scenario. If you look at the diagram on the left, so up 2024, we predict there will be 40 million tourist arrivals to Thailand as compared with 2019, which is 39 million. So that was a good news for Thailand in terms of recovery. USA, almost the same as our previous forecast, similar. So last year's forecast still stands for this year. And in terms of the source market, it's more or less the same recovery pattern. So these are the country-specific forecasts. In terms of the overall forecast in Asia Pacific, the total inbound visitor arrivals in Asia Pacific will recover to 817.7 million, and also 702 million, and also 501 million in the mild, medium, and the severe scenario, respectively, by 2022. And this represent 116.2% recovery according to the mild scenario, and 99.8% recovery as compared with 2019 in the mediums. The first one is in the mild scenario. The second one, 99.8 is in the mild scenario, and also 71.3 is in the severe scenario. But we do not see we are going towards the severe scenario. It's very likely that we are on the path as we forecasted in the mild scenario. So in 2024, the tourist arrivals will be 702 million visitor arrivals to Asia Pacific, which is almost similar to the pre-COVID-19 level. All right, in conclusion, among the 6 sub-regions, South Asia will have the highest recovery rate by the end of forecasting period in the mild scenario, i.e. it will recover by 123.3% as compared with 2019 in 2024. And the Pacific and Americas will recover faster than other regions with the same recovery rate of 105% in the medium scenario and 80.3% and 79.2% in the severe scenario, respectively. And the lowest recoveries in the 3 scenarios are actually in Northeast Asia, which has 112.6% of the 2019 tourist arrivals in the mild scenario, and also 95% of the 2019 level in the medium scenario for the South Asia. And also for the West Asia, actually the 61.3% of the 2019 level in the severe scenario. So these are the slowest recovery sub-regions. In terms of market share, Northeast Asia will continue to dominate the total inbound market in Asia Pacific, followed by the Americas and the Southeast Asia. And the continuous update of the visitor forecast within the region are very important for destinations in terms of designing relevant recovery strategies. So we are continue to make every possible effort to generate accurate forecasts for different destinations. So stay tuned for the next update. I'm sure you have already seen the press release today that the new forecast has been just released. You will be able to access the detailed forecast if you are interested in a particular destination or particular source market. So you can access through Pata. And overall, the overall message I would like to give here is that yes, the COVID situation is evolving, especially with the Omicron. There are impact on the tourist arrivals within Asia Pacific, but the impact is minimal based on our forecast. So stay positive. Stay positive in terms of spirit, not PCR. And the future looks like it's bright, and we are seeing the end of at the end of the tunnel. But the light actually is at the end of the tunnel. We already seen the light. So this is my presentation. If you have any questions, my colleague, Dr. Anyu Liu, also here today, so he can answer some detailed technical questions if you have questions related to forecasting techniques. Thank you very much. That's me.
Thank you very much, Professor Song, for your presentation. And as Professor Song said, if you have any questions, there will be a chance for discussion at the end of the last presenter. So feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So Caroline's already ready. She's up and ready, but let me just do a quick introduction. Our next presenter is the head of travel research at Euromonitor International, our good partner of PATA. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our good friend, Ms. Caroline Bremner. Caroline, over to you now.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you very much for the very insightful presentation by Professor Song. So I'm just going to share my screen now. So as Paul said, I'm Caroline Bremner. I'm the head of travel research at Euromonitor International. And it's my pleasure to present the very latest macroeconomic forecast that our economies and consumers team has published just yesterday, actually. So I'm delighted to have some brand new data to share with you. And so I'll give you the latest view on the global economic outlook, and then look at some key countries that are of interest to PATA. And I'm also very pleased to be able to share with you some industry data that we have on sustainability priorities and levels of engagement in different regions around the world, including Asia Pacific. And of course, we'll be having a Q&A, so if anybody has any questions, I can answer those during the Q&A. So first of all, the good news is that, well, what we're seeing is that Omicron is slowing the global economic recovery, but it's not completely derailing it. So I think that's a really positive message. So yes, there was the global economic recession with global GDP dropping by 3% last year. And then the fact that we have, well, 2020, should I say, then the massive rebound in 2021, growing by almost 6% last year. And then, of course, we have the slowdown because of the new variant, which is complicating the recovery. There are also some other issues that we're seeing taking place, which are again acting as a drag on the global recovery, namely inflation, the fact that we have very high oil prices at the moment, over $80 a barrel. We have high energy prices overall, the cost of fuel. We have the fact that there are some global supply shortages, namely in areas such as electronics. So again, food being disrupted by the shortages as well. So again, you know, there are some sort of dark clouds that are dragging on the recovery, yet we still have positive growth, and particularly in very strong growth coming out of China, particularly last year, almost by 8%. So that was very much fueled by the government support of the recovery. However, there are some areas there that are acting as a slowdown, particularly the very strict COVID-19 zero COVID policy that they have implemented is actually constraining a little bit of pent-up demand. We're also seeing that the developing countries grew very well last year, and this year we predict growth of 4.6. So even though it's not as strong as over 6%, it's still good. And, you know, considering that we have the complication of Omicron, this is quite a positive outlook. And as I said, this data is very much hot off the press, just released yesterday by our fantastic analytics team. So when it comes to the different economies that PATA members are interested in, yes, we saw sort of contraction, particularly in key markets that depend on China outbound demand, such as Macau, because of tourism and the casinos, etc. But then we have this very strong rebound for these countries coming out of the back of, you know, the improved vaccination rates. I was looking at the rates for, you know, Asia. Yes, there are some sort of very low levels of vaccination taking place, such as in Nepal or Papua New Guinea, under sort of 5%. Then on the other hand, you have countries such as Hong Kong, Macau, Vietnam, and China, all with vaccination rates in the 80s. So we are seeing that some countries in Asia, the vaccination progress is very strong. And of course, what we need to ensure is that it's equitable and everybody sort of is given the right to the vaccine. We're also seeing some very interesting upgrades for the likes of India Obviously, India struggled with Delta last year, so that was very sort of difficult, challenging situation. However, India as well is now going and picked up the speed of its vaccination progress and its program. And now we've actually adjusted our forecast for India up the way. So there are some sort of interesting downgrades happening as well for the likes of Europe and the US. And actually our team have knocked off 1% of the forecast for 2022 for the US. So I think that's a sign of what the impact of Omicron is going to be, that it is slowing economic recovery. However, it's not completely derailing it. We also have a global recovery index, which our teams have put together. And this is based on 5 different indicators. So it takes account of global, the country's economic activity, employment rates, retail spending, consumer spending, and there's another one, but it slipped my mind. But basically we have 5 components, and that's it, consumer confidence. And what we're seeing, so we look at all these 5 metrics, we compose an index, and we can see which countries are recovering faster as opposed to those pre-crisis 2019 levels. So as you can see in the dark blue, we have areas such as Poland, Estonia, and Europe, and then China. So China very much leading the world in terms of its economic recovery. The fact that it has the zero COVID policy means that it's very much focused on its domestic market. And what we're seeing is that retail spending, consumer confidence is all over 100%. So they have, they're back to those pre-crisis levels, despite the complications of Omicron. Other areas doing well, such as Australasia, but it's Latin America that is really dragging. So this is for Q1 2022. And then our forecast for Q4 2022 is, you can see that still Latin America is behind the curve in its recovery, especially Brazil. But we're seeing overall, and this takes account of the Omicron effect, we can still see that there is much progress happening, particularly in the likes of Asia Pacific. And I was looking at the consumer confidence, it's on the rise. We have the fact that consumer spending is really strong in Asia Pacific, helped by those domestic markets. As we know, many economies have pivoted away from international to domestic tourism. Overall, when we look at the global economy, we can see that yes, there is this balance between the drop in international travel and the less severe drop for domestic tourism. So again, that buffer that we see between domestic demand and international demand. But overall, it's going to be a long, hard recovery to reach those pre-crisis levels of 2019. So we expect, this is our best case scenario, that by 2024, the world will have recouped those losses that we saw over the past couple of years. So we're now looking, 2 years worth of COVID. So, as Professor Song, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we can see from the economic data that, things are improving, even if there is a slight slowdown in the pace of the recovery. I thought it was very important to highlight that there is much great work being done despite the challenges of COVID. And what we're seeing is that travel brands in Asia Pacific are walking the path to net zero. So when we spoke to industry, we asked travel businesses, how engaged are you with sustainability? The number one priority globally and in Asia Pacific was the importance of supporting staff. And I just thought this is just fantastic, that the social element is really strong. And then Asia Pacific is outperforming the rest of the world in terms of its recycling, in terms of developing sustainable products. So that's really important that we keep the focus on innovation, equally sustainability in terms of sourcing and supply chain resilience. And as I mentioned, with those shortages of food, disruptions to the supply chain, these are all factors that are hitting travel businesses particularly hard as well, particularly when it comes to food and beverages. We can also see that Asia compared to Western Europe is, we can see that 86% of travel businesses in Asia say that sustainability is extremely or at least very important to them. But there is a caveat. Yes, it's very important. However, 75%, so 3/4, say that much more could be done to improve their engagement with sustainability. We know that sustainability is important because it flows through the strategy of the company. We can see that Asia Pacific actually outperforms Western Europe in terms of having a purpose, so very much driven by people, planet, less than sort of, putting that in the mix with profit. There are some areas that we could see or hope for better improvement, such as having much more activist CEOs, because ultimately sustainability needs to be led from the top, and then it filters down into the rest of the organization. However, overall, I think these are, really good numbers and show that a lot of great work is being done in the region. 60% of Asian travel businesses are also engaging with the global goals. Yes, there are 40% that aren't, but I think this is a strong indication of just how important the UN sustainability agenda is. We can see that Asia Pacific particularly focuses on SDG 8, which is on the importance of decent work and economic growth. Also is very, very important for responsible consumption and production. And it's also interesting that, health and well-being and quality education are also important in Asia. However, there is room for improvement. But I think, again, as an indicator of where we're at and how driven sustainability and how important that is for Asian travel businesses, this is a really good sign. So just from today's macroeconomic update, I would like to say that Omicron is a major challenge. We can see that it's acting as a drag on the global recovery. However, it has not completely scuppered it. There is hope that, we can see that, Europe and the US, they're going to lose maybe 1% of their forecast growth. So that takes them down, say, from 4% to 3%. So it's not leading to the sharp drops that we saw at the peak of the crisis. We know that domestic tourism continues to be very important. It's that buffer, and it's a great way to keep the domestic market going and ensuring that hospitality is a vibrant source of revenue and jobs for local economies. But also we know that we continue to be beset by travel restrictions, bans, and digital health passes, which can help that situation. But the most important thing is that we have equity with the vaccine to ensure that everybody has a chance to reopen safely. The great news is that sustainability and purpose are at the core of the recovery for Asian travel businesses. And it really is lovely to see that Asia is walking the walk when it comes to sustainability and the importance of people and the planet. So thank you very much for having me here today, and looking forward to the Q&A shortly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for your presentation. She will be back with us just after this last presenter. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A, and she'll be able to answer the questions there. So we've come now to our final presenter, and with us once again, joining us for today's forecast webinar, he is the CEO of TCI Research. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Olivier Henry Biabord. Olivier, over to you.
Hi, Paul. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure being with you today. I just need to make sure I can share my screen, which you would probably, yes, that's it. So, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a very exciting session again to kick off the year with all these fascinating data that previous speakers have shared. I will end up the session with some qualitative aspects, which are fueled by what we call the travel sentiment. It's quite important to track the travel sentiment insofar as we know people are going to choose a destination they trust. And so beyond travel restrictions, the image and reputation of place to visit is increasingly taking some sort of leadership in the way people behave. So this is what I would like to share with you today, based on social listening techniques, capturing what people are sharing on social networks, and what the media's officials and companies are, how they shape the reputation of places. So for those who are not familiar with TCI, we are a travel data intelligence agency endorsed by UNWTO and a long and happy PATA knowledge partner. We're setting international standards for measuring some very important KPIs, particularly for destinations and DMOs. And so today the focus is about the destination reputation and sentiment. So the data you're going to show come from a monitoring of social conversations at large. So it's not only fueled by travelers, but it could be fueled by anyone reacting or providing opinions about any elements related to destinations, of course, in relation to travel and tourism. So that can come from posts or blogs or forums and any social channels activated through the period. And again, this cannot be predictive of consumer behaviors, but having a strong reputation is probably the best pillar to have as a destination to be chosen in the middle to a long term. So let me start with one indicator, which is measuring the polarity of conversation. So it's not about the intensity, but it's more about the polarity of social conversations in relation to the largest destinations across Asia compared with some other destinations in the world. And so that score that can reach from -100 to 100, depending on that balance of opinions, is actually has broken a record in positive for Asia Pacific in December, with a net sentiment score of 47. This is a relatively optimistic news because that's the first time that value is so high since we have recorded and analyzed this from the beginning of the year, now 2 years ago. This is the best score ever. So I understand this can be a bit hard to believe because of these conversations about Omicron, but it seems like the social conversations are kind of anticipating something that may not be so brutal for the tourism industry. There is clearly a kind of a learning curve. And also, whereas the Omicron and the pandemic is still populating 20-25% of total conversations about travel and tourism, there is an air of optimism in the sense that it may not be so serious compared to previous variants. And there are some growing conversations, particularly in Europe, telling that maybe we are seeing a bit the end of the tunnel, or we can start living with that for the next years. Also, and I will develop that after, there are many other non-pandemic related conversations still populating the travel and tourism conversations, which basically are super positive, pushed both by the industry, by the DMOs, by social conversations overall, but also a lot of resurgence of organic conversations from the travel community, sharing tips, sharing about secret spots, and so on. So Asia Pacific is starting the year with a quite strong brand equity, strong in absolute value, stronger than competition if you compare the score with Europe, with Americas. Of course, Middle East and Africa in particular has been hit quite hard because the Omicron was kind of originating from there. So it's recovering right now, but it's true to say that the focus is a bit less on China when it comes to discuss about all these pandemic aspects. The score is on the rise overall from all main markets, but particularly from Europe, where you see a very positive score of 50 points net, also across the region. And whereas North America may not be the market where the sentiment and reputation of Asia is the highest compared to other markets, it's also on the rise. So the year is starting with a quite positive, let's say, sentiment and reputation when it comes to discuss Asia Pacific as a whole. Just to spot two destinations that are interesting to track. One is China. China, as you can imagine, 2 years ago started really bad in terms of reputation, because it used to be the place where that things not started really, but somehow was very negative, and it continues now. The positive trends months after month, sometimes a bit up and down, but they ended up the year with a quite positive sentiment overall. There's another interesting destination, particularly in Asia Pacific in terms of reputation, which is where your headquarters is, Pata. It's Thailand. Thailand has been used very much as a kind of a marker or symbolic place, specifically in TV reports, in social conversations, showing that Asia is gradually reopening also to long-haul visitors in a way that is safe, a bit strict but safe. And so all these protocols in place have been populating a lot of social conversations. And so the positivity for Thailand is also gaining up and up month after month. And in Thailand, the net sentiment score in December was the highest ever from the start of the crisis. Looking at the picture at large, so we're pointing out a few other destinations across the region. We still have a group of destinations where the reputation based on the past 6 months period has been quite positive and actually showing a sort of competitive advantage for many different reasons. And I don't have time to elaborate on all of them, but we're seeing Sri Lanka, for example, gaining a lot of popularity and positivity in conversations thanks to the wellness aspects and dimensions. A country like Indonesia has been super popular across the surfing community, for example, and there's been a lot of positivity around the sea and water activities for this country in particular. India also was on the rise compared to the last tracker, particularly because not only, but also because there is a lot of positive news and stories shared by organic fans, but also some of the GMOs about the heritage and the fascinating heritage of the country. And some of the countries like Taiwan, or but also Japan, has been quite popular in conversations related to the food and gastronomy. And we know this is a very high and very important segment, foodies, in terms of recovery, because we don't talk about the pandemic. We just focus on something which is delightful and, coming to something like not the new normal, but the back to normal with the self-indulgence and so on. And there's a group of countries where the reputation is positive, but it's been maybe a bit more exposed. Many cases, not particularly because or due to tourism issues, but more to some, let's say, more social factors or external factors that could be sometimes a bit more detrimental to the place branding. Just to highlight a few examples of or selection of examples of positive reputation drivers. China, for example, has been commented in a very positive way for this new project of high-speed railway train, and giving potential travelers possibility to use a more maybe eco-friendly way of traveling, whereas flight is still suffering a bit from flight shame, growing perceptions, particularly in Europe. A lot of conversations about ecotourism in India, for example. Many interesting organic conversations among the travel community, showing how Asia can be so different in different seasons, including autumn. Many elements related to the regenerative travel, and I can only encourage you to read the last issues and trends report that we did about this particular aspect. Anything and any efforts done in terms of reactivating, protecting not only the environment, but also the local culture is generating a lot of positivity and sentiment for the private sector and for the destination. That's the case, for example, for this new cultural centers portraying the Aboriginal arts in Australia. Lots of best islands for these, best award for that, and top results, making a lot of efforts for different aspects, including sustainability. Spiritual tourism is gaining a lot of influence as well in online conversations. There's been a lot of Asian airlines which have been spotted and mentioned as the best in class for different reasons, not only the service, but also for sustainability efforts. We've been also hearing a lot of positive stories about the light, the concept of lights and light shows, walking, things which are, highlighting the beauty of cities, particularly at night, is very spectacular as a positive driver in conversations. Many best cities portrayed or mentioned in various influencing channels like Lonely Planet and so on, but also things around how scuba diving, for example, is able not only to delight visitors, but also can be a way to protect the environment and coral reef, for example. As always, the vigilance points are more related to, of course, the pandemic and all consequences of the pandemic in terms of travel frictions, travels, lack of clarity, constantly changing rules and so on. Also sometimes dealing with or generating delays at airports, a bit of social protests and some diplomatic issues, social issues, and a few anecdotal stories like this poor tourist attacked by a crocodile. But at the end of the day, what I would like to mention is the positivity in social conversations is really increasingly related to very specific niche tourism. And one of the aspects is more and more about ecotourism. People are happy to come back to tourism again, but not at any cost, and not at any cost for the environment. This is particularly true across Europe, but not only in Europe. This maturity of expectations for ecotourism is also super popular across Asia Pacific as a region. So as a way to let's say wrap up, some of the good news in terms of maybe forecasting is independently of the travel restrictions and the pandemic, which are still the main factors basically shaping the forecast. But in terms of pure sentiment, desire, reputation, we're seeing that Asia Pacific is really kicking off 2022 with a very strong and quite competitive reputation equity. It's true from Europe as well. It will take time before Europeans go to Asia again for many different reasons, starting with restrictions. But in terms of dreaming about Asia, it's still high on a consumer agenda. We're seeing this event-driven tourism coming back, all the private sector excellence and efforts populating conversation in a very positive way. And as it was mentioned by Caroline and other speakers before, sustainability is definitely a good seller in terms of promotional activities, having great resonance in consumer mind. And as always, negativity is fueled by COVID, still today populating 20-25% of total conversations, usually in a negative way. And also all these side effects and consequences and external factors. And there's one example, just to finish, I would like to mention this, what we call the Djokovic Syndrome. And all these problematic of a destination that can be influenced in terms of attractiveness for something which has nothing to do with travel and tourism. But we've seen a big drop of reputation for Australia in the past days, in the past weeks, due to the fact that, we had this incident. And you can agree or disagree with the way Australia has been dealing with that. There are many arguments for both sides, but the problem is it's growing a lot of protest and a lot of negativity and controversies and frictions between people discussing also online. And that's an example that shows that somehow it's difficult to manage that, but it's true to say that more and more in this COVID era, some of the reputation of travel and tourism and destinations can be also influenced by non-tourism factors. At the end of the day, there could be way of playing with non-tourism ghost ambassadors also to provide a bit more of a positivity and relaxing a bit the consumer mind, because one of the factors for this year and one of the elements of drivers or of positivity and reputation is how travel and tourism is going to not only resume back to normal, but also be a way to alleviate a bit all these discriminations and protests and frictions between countries and between sourcing markets and destinations. So that's it for me. And I will be happy to take your question if you have some.
Thank you very much, Olivier. Yes, it's time now for discussion and Q&A. So if you have any questions, please do drop it in the Q&A function. I'd like to welcome back our speakers, Caroline and Professor Song. And Professor Song will be joined by his colleague, Anyu Liu. And helping me moderate the panel discussion is, of course, PATA CEO, Ms. Liz Ortiguera. Liz, do you want to start off with the first question?
Well, sure. And first, I'd like to thank all of our esteemed speakers, Professor Song, Caroline, and Olivier. My thanks for your updates. Certainly through this pandemic, the environment has been so dynamic. The policies, the changes, the health situation across the globe, and frequent updates like this are critical for our network and our industry to determine how should they best manage and find opportunity next. So thank you so much. And I'm actually very happy to hear that in light of the Omicron cloud that we're feeling across the globe, that there are silver linings, there are positive elements starting to emerge, and that we are seeing, the light at the end of the tunnel, hopefully, if things are managed well and properly over the next several months. So my thanks for that. Maybe we'll start with a few questions. Professor Song, my first question to you would be, how do you see the China policy unfolding over the next 6 to 12 months? If you have a sense for a projection on timing in terms of how the market might open up, and if the focus will be on inbound versus outbound.
Professor Song? Are you still here, Professor Song? I see you here, or Anyu?
Yeah, I think maybe I can help to answer this question on behalf of Professor Song. Yes, we know that China has a very strict, travel restriction in terms of travel, but since we expect that the travel restriction will be not that strict. Maybe particularly, I think the Olympic Games after that, maybe China will try to leave the travel ban gradually, and fingers crossed. Then I think because China is not only a top inbound destination, but also an outbound source market. So hopefully by then that it will help the recovery of the international travel, not within the Asia Pacific, but also in the world.
Well, I want to follow up that question now. I mean, if China, let's say, doesn't open up this year, does that will then change the forecast for every other destination? I mean, it would, I guess, downgrade every other destination and the forecast that have been presented. Is that correct?
Yes, but when we generated the forecast, we have already considered this, and by that time we don't expect that China will open the border with very soon, and that's why I think in Professor Song's presentation you can see that we lower down the forecast of the Southeast country, because Southeast countries, for example Thailand, China is traditionally the one of the major source market. So because China doesn't open the border, that's why it will also influence the recovery of other destinations.
Liz, you have a question?
If there's any, yes, I'll follow on to that. Do you know if there's any discussion on how China would open up? And would it be, for example, city by city, province by province, or?
I think so far the policy is that at least China, mainland China and Hong Kong, they are trying their best to leave the travel ban between mainland China and Hong Kong. And as you said, yes, maybe it will be open region by region gradually and not in one go maybe.
Okay, great. One more question on your presentation. It was interesting to see the shift in forecasting for West Asia.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about that dynamic and why did it dramatically change?
Yeah, by that time when we did the forecast in last round 2021, we expected that maybe West Asia or Turkey will close the border for a longer period. The reality shows that Turkey is more positive, so they leave the travel ban. That's why the recovery of Turkey is faster than other regions. And that's why we consider this and also upgrade the forecast this time.
I see. Thank you. And Caroline, I'd like to turn to you. There's a question that was posted from Daniel Turner. And he writes, thank you for your insightful presentation. I'm particularly concerned about the UN SDG figures and in particular the biodiversity SDGs 14 and 15. Can you provide any insight into why engagement on biodiversity is so low, considering these underpin all other SDGs? Evidence suggests that SDGs will not be fulfilled unless supported by a strong and stable planet.
Yeah, that's the thing. When you drill down into the weeds a little bit with looking at the engagement levels for all the different individual SDGs, you do see some sort of low engagement figures. So yeah, we actually at Euromonitor, we recently, just before Christmas, I published a report on climate action. So we focused on SDG 13 and we looked at that specifically. So for Asia Pacific, their engagement with SDG 13 is 39% versus globally, which is 58%. So already you can see there's like a little bit of a disconnect there. And it just means that maybe it just needs to be a bit more sort of a light shone on it in terms of biodiversity. Because I'm sure there's a lot of great work being done at the sort of the local level. But when we specifically asked travel businesses, which SDGs do you engage with? This is what, you know, the results were. And of course, I'd be delighted to speak to Daniel Turner, who posed the question, and we could look at the numbers in more detail. We could look at the number of respondents, and very happy to share my details if you'd like to have that conversation.
Yeah, Daniel, if please do send us an email and we can definitely connect you with Caroline. I want to actually have a question for Olivier. You know, I was looking at the destinations you've shown. You know, there were some destinations where the borders aren't open. They have high e-reputation, and there were some that are open that had poor e-reputation. You know, there's only a handful of destinations in Asia that are open. For instance, like Singapore is open, but it has a pretty poor e-reputation, while Philippines is still fairly closed, but sort of high on that. What's the reasoning behind that?
Well, you know, your reputation is always a very complex equation that is not really, let's say, fully correlated to the fact that if you're open or not. First of all, before the pandemic and before all these problems of travel restrictions, some destinations enjoy better reputation than others, and it's maybe still the case. And the fact that, you know, the problem of being open or not open is you can be open, but it all depends on, particularly from the long haul market, about the risk you're taking to go there, not from a pandemic point of view, but the risk of maybe having some changes taking place where you are over there, or the risk of losing your money if by any chance you are tested positive just before embarking your flights and then you're losing all your money. So all this, you know, social and political environment that sometimes can be still in your mind when you decide to travel somewhere. So the fact to be open or not open has quite limited influence. It's all the travel logistics that's behind when you decide to go that is taking, you know, a lot of influence and consequences when you want to decide between this or that place to visit in Asia in particular, because it's a long way now from Europeans' point of view or from the US point of view. So so there's little, when a country reopens, we see and measure in our tracker that usually it provides a sort of a better reputation for a while. But then what's going on when you travel, and maybe also in terms of the quality of visit, and do you really live the full experience? Because you can be open, but if you're open with a lot of restrictions over there, then the experience is limited. And people know a bit about that, and they want to dream, but they want to have the full experience, also because they spend the money for that. So you can be open, but if it's a bit restricted, then you see a bit of negativity in the conversations as well. So it's a much more complex equation, I can say.
I agree.
This is not her head as she has that experience.
There's a question that got posted, which carries on with that. Any specific promotional strategies are suggested post-pandemic to attract more from the Asia-Pacific region? Well, one, I'll say best practice that was shared by our destination member, the Maldives, and they talked about how even during the strict closures, they never stopped communicating. So continue to keep your destination top of mind, because people are still dreaming, wishing, planning for travel, even when if they can't today, but they are planning. And so you need to be top of mind and also show how your product is evolving to touch on those needs for escape, for nature, for wellness, so that I think is important for every destination. So I'd invite my colleagues to add to that. And you, Caroline or Olivier?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, as always, the more specific you can be in terms of passion-based tourism, niche tourism, surfers community, people who are looking for religious tourism, people looking for an absolute foodies travel in Hong Kong or Singapore or China, whenever it's possible again. So things which are the more specific, the better you can promote, because you will escape all these travel frictions and all this pandemic. And definitely wherever possible. So when travel restrictions are completely unleashed, so when it's possible to travel again, we're feeling also through conversations and also from other surveys, there's a growing resurgence of sensitivity for the price and the value for money. So the main concern today is less about the pandemic. It's more about the consumer. So the value for money, the money you spend. So in terms of promotional, you keep the dream with passion-based tourism, kind of, event-driven based tourism, like the light shows, something like that, things which are spectacular. Things which indulge yourself and very sensorial kind of tourism, like foodies, and then the price attached to that. And as soon as a country is opening and you have a lot of promotional with a discount on flights and super package and so on, people are looking for that very much, because also it mitigates the risk of losing your money. And especially if you can have good insurances with that for a COVID reimbursement in case of cancellation and so on, then you have the dream combo, and you can activate the code to booking, whereas the dream is kept high.
Great, thank you. Perhaps I'll end with a question that was posted in the chat group, and it says here, I'll pose this to the group. What are the key factors to sustainably restart inbound and outbound travel in the region this year?
I can go first. So basically, I think if you've kept your domestic market going, then it should be, also a way to sort of gradually pivot to attracting your inbound market. But also, as you've just mentioned, that everything needs to be seamless, it needs to be safe. And I would very much agree with the focus being on experiential and everything being truly kind of consumer-centric and personalized for the guest and the visitor when they get there. So I feel that it's if you can keep your domestic tourism in such a very healthy state, then the international will sort of slide in alongside that. That would be my hope.
Great.
And I would like to add up on Caroline's suggestion. I mean that for international travel, it's not one country can handle this. So I think maybe the vaccination passport and also the global collaboration are the key.
Thank you. Olivier?
No, I don't have any further comments. Just to say maybe one thing about the fact that the lodging sector and accommodation is playing a great role in pushing innovation, sustainability. People are looking for a place to visit, but now the accommodation is kind of an epicenter of this safe and full travel. And I was mentioning that during my presentation, but the hotel can be a destination as such, from which you will be able to discover the place in a safe way. So any promotional efforts or any partnership with the private sector dealing with directing people and guiding people to very, very unique lodging that has all these, ticking the boxes, sustainability, innovation, hospitality, and the friendliness and warm staff and trained staff. And it's a bit of a challenge today because many countries are missing are a bit short in terms of qualified staff. But people just want to have, back to just a normal dialogue with somebody in a peaceful way. Peaceful, it would be absolutely important to resume beyond the classic tourism product experience, so to speak.
Great, thank you. And I'll add a couple of my own views on factors to sustainably restart. First of all, I would say vaccine equity, making sure that the low income, lower mid income countries have equal access to vaccines is going to remain critically important. And we've heard the WHO head say that we cannot booster our way out of this pandemic. It won't work for the wealthy nations to have full access to boosters while low-income countries don't even have, in some cases, first and second doses. We'll get, that's a recipe for more variants to emerge. And so I think, number one, that's critical. And that's why PATA bound together with to support WHO Foundation, UNICEF, and we formed a travel sector vaccine coalition with our travel colleagues from Virgin Atlantic and Collinson Insurance to engage more of our enterprise colleagues in terms of raising funding and raising awareness, that there needs to be equal access. That's one. And then two, I would say, is a duty of care approach and risk management. Yesterday, we had a great speaker from the International Vaccine Institute, and it's very much about not onerous requirements, but really being a partner in managing the risk. And ministries across the region are partnering, the tourism ministries are partnering with their health ministries to put in the right measures. And things like even just wearing a good mask and wearing it properly can go a long way. So it's getting people educated and practicing some of these measures so that, to manage the risk across the board for the communities, for the traveler, for the frontline staff in travel and tourism that are, meeting and greeting and supporting all of these travelers. I think that, we need to think of these ways to make sure that we're an enabler to, a low risk type of travel. So I think with that, Paul, we can close this.
Yes. Those are. We should leave it at that with the last words from Liz, because we definitely run over time, about 15 minutes over time. But thank you so much once again to our speakers, Professor Song, Olivier, and Caroline. Thank you so much for spending the time and sharing your insights with us regarding the forecast for the next few years and months. So thank you so much. And thank you very much, Liz, for moderating that session. I'll let you guys all leave, and I'll just do a quick wrap up of some of the things upcoming from PATA. So once again, thank you to all our, thank you, Caroline, thank you, Olivier. Once again, thank you to all of our speakers for their time and efforts, for being with us here today. You heard that we have the forecast book, which is now available now. This is the executive summary. There will be a full report as well as a destination report released in the next few months, but the executive summary is available now. So, you know, if you're a PATA member, if you have a discount on it, corporates and above, I think you get it complimentary. And of course, anybody can purchase it, and it's available now at the PATA store. Just look under PATA catalog. I also want to make you aware of an upcoming webinar we have on this Thursday. It's our PATA Destination Insight series featuring Micronesia, presented by PATA and BBC. We just have a couple destinations from the Micronesia region. So we'll be hearing from Guam, Palau, and Kiribati. And of course, our good friend at BBC will be just presenting some of the insights they have around the region. So with that, that is the end of today's session. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is paul@pata.org. More information about PATA. If you want to know more about how to become a PATA member, feel free to check out our website at www.pata.org. And with that, that is the end of today's webinar. I will see you soon. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and take care.